Louisa arrived in London on a cold morning. The sky was gray, and the air felt different from her home in Brazil. She held her small suitcase and looked around the airport, trying to understand the signs written in English. Everything seemed fast, noisy, and new. She felt nervous, but also excited. It was her first time in another country, far away from her family and friends. She took a bus to her hostel in the city center. The streets were full of red buses, bicycles, and people walking quickly with coffee cups in their hands. From the window, she saw old buildings mixed with modern ones. The city looked alive and full of stories. When she arrived at the hostel, the receptionist spoke too fast, and Louisa could only catch a few words. She smiled politely and used simple sentences she had practiced before coming. Her room was small but clean. There was a window with a view of the street and a desk where she placed her notebook and dictionary. That evening, she sat by the window and wrote in her journal about her first day. She felt a mix of happiness and fear. Everything around her was new. She missed the warm air of Rio and the sound of her mother's voice. Still, she told herself that this was the beginning of something important. The next morning, Louisa woke up early and walked to her language school. The weather was cold, and she could see her breath in the air. She stopped for a moment to buy coffee from a street cart. The man at the cart smiled and said something friendly, but she understood only part of it. She laughed softly and nodded. It made her realize how much she needed to learn. When she arrived at the school, she saw students from many countries waiting outside. There were people from Japan, Turkey, Spain, and Korea. Everyone looked a little nervous, just like her. Inside, the walls were full of posters with English words and pictures. The smell of coffee and paper filled the hallway. Louisa met her teacher, Mr. Thomas, who spoke slowly and clearly. He welcomed the students and explained that learning a language was not about being perfect, but about being brave. Louisa listened carefully. She took notes in her notebook, writing down every new word. During the first class, they practiced simple conversations and short stories. Louisa's hands were shaking a little when it was her turn to speak, but she tried. Her voice was quiet, but she finished her sentence. A small smile appeared on her face. After school, she walked around the neighborhood, repeating English phrases to herself. She read the names of shops and tried to pronounce them. The city felt big, but with every step, it became a little less scary. That night, she cooked a small meal in the shared kitchen and listened to English music on her phone. She understood only a few words, but she liked the rhythm. She felt that learning English would not only change her language, but also her life. As she went to bed, she looked at the ceiling and whispered to herself that tomorrow she would try again. She didn't know what the next day would bring, but she was ready to keep learning, one word at a time. The first week in London passed quickly for Louisa. Every morning, she walked to school with her notebook in her hand. She tried to remember the new words she had learned the day before. The city still felt strange, but little by little, she started to understand how things worked. She learned how to take the right bus, how to cross the busy streets, and how to say simple sentences in English when buying coffee or asking for directions. Still, it was not easy. Sometimes she felt lost and confused. In class, the teacher spoke slowly, but some students answered too fast. Their accents were different, and Louisa often couldn't catch every word. She looked at their faces, trying to guess the meaning. When it was her turn to speak, her hands felt cold and her heart beat faster. She made small mistakes and sometimes forgot the right words. But Mr. Thomas always smiled and told everyone to keep practicing. Outside of school, things were even harder. One afternoon, Louisa went to a supermarket near her hostel. She wanted to return a box of cereal that was open. She explained to the cashier, but her English was too simple. The woman behind the counter didn't understand and looked impatient. Louisa felt embarrassed. She tried again, using her hands to show what she meant. Finally, another worker came and helped. Louisa said thank you many times and left the store with red cheeks. On her way back, she wanted to cry, but instead, she took a deep breath and told herself that mistakes were part of learning. That night, she wrote the new words she had heard in her small notebook. She repeated them again and again before sleeping. The next morning, she used one of those phrases when ordering breakfast, and the waiter understood her perfectly. It was a small success, but it made her smile all day. In the evenings, Louisa often sat in the hostel's kitchen with her laptop. She watched short English videos with subtitles. She paused them, repeated the sentences, and copied useful expressions into her notebook. Sometimes other students joined her. They came from Italy, Korea, and France. They all had the same goal: to speak better English. Together, they laughed at their pronunciation and helped each other find the right words. One weekend, Louisa decided to explore the city alone. She visited a local market full of colorful fruits, clothes, and souvenirs. The sellers spoke quickly, but she tried to listen carefully. She bought a small bracelet and practiced saying "thank you" in a natural way. She noticed that people were friendly when she tried to speak, even if her English wasn't perfect. At night, she wrote in her journal about everything she had seen. She described the smell of fresh bread, the sound of music on the street, and the feeling of freedom that came with every new word she learned. She still missed home, but she felt proud of herself. Each day brought a new challenge, but also a new lesson. Louisa realized that learning a language was not just about grammar or vocabulary. It was about courage. Every time she spoke, she became a little stronger. Every mistake taught her something. London was still big and noisy, but now it felt less like a stranger and more like a teacher. Louisa knew that the road ahead was long, but she was ready to walk it, one simple sentence at a time. Weeks passed, and Louisa started to feel more comfortable in London. Every morning, she left her hostel with a small smile and a growing sense of confidence. The city was no longer just a collection of unknown streets and loud noises. It was slowly becoming part of her story. She had learned how to order food, ask for help, and even make small talk with people she met. Her English was still far from perfect, but she could finally express herself. That feeling gave her energy every day. At school, Mr. Thomas noticed her progress. He often gave her short writing tasks and asked the class to describe their weekends or favorite places. Louisa worked carefully, choosing each word with attention. When she received her paper back and saw the teacher's note saying, "Good work," she felt proud. It was a simple comment, but it meant a lot to her. It showed that all the late nights of studying and repeating phrases were finally paying off. One afternoon, the teacher invited students to join a conversation club after class. Louisa hesitated at first, but curiosity won. The club took place in a small classroom filled with chairs arranged in a circle. There were students from different countries who wanted to practice speaking. At the beginning, Louisa mostly listened. The others talked about movies, food, and travel. She tried to follow every sentence, writing down new words in her notebook. After a while, she decided to speak. Her voice was quiet, but clear. She shared her thoughts about a movie she had recently watched. When she finished, everyone smiled and nodded. That moment gave her a rush of joy. She realized she could really communicate. The next day, Louisa went to a local cafe near her school. It was a small place with warm lights and the smell of fresh coffee. She stood in line, practicing her order silently. When it was her turn, she spoke calmly and clearly. The barista understood her right away and even complimented her accent. Louisa left the cafe with her drink and a feeling of victory. It was just coffee, but to her, it felt like a medal. That evening, she went back to her room and wrote everything in her journal. She wrote about the people she met, the words she learned, and the moments she felt brave. She also wrote about her fears, because they were still there. Sometimes she still worried about making mistakes or not understanding someone. But now she saw those moments differently. They were no longer failures, they were steps forward. On weekends, she started to explore more of London. She visited markets, small bookshops, and museums. In every place, she tried to read signs and understand the information written in English. She even began talking to locals. Some conversations were short and simple, but they helped her feel more connected to the city. Each small success made her stronger. She was no longer afraid of trying, and that changed everything. Her English improved, but more importantly, her confidence grew. She began to see herself not just as a student, but as someone who was truly living her dream. When she looked out of her window at night, she felt grateful. The city that once scared her now felt like a friend. London was teaching her not only a language, but also how to believe in herself. One morning, Louisa arrived at school and noticed a new poster on the wall. It said that local businesses were looking for language students for short internships. The idea was to help learners practice English in real-life situations while gaining some work experience. The opportunity seemed perfect for her. She had already improved her speaking and listening, but she wanted to use English outside the classroom. That evening, she sat at her desk and began to prepare her resume. It was the first time she had ever written one in English. She searched for examples online, looked up words in her dictionary, and carefully chose every phrase. A few days later, the teacher announced that a small bookstore near the school was looking for a part-time assistant. Louisa felt a spark of excitement. She loved books and had always dreamed of working in a place full of them. With the teacher's help, she sent her application. A week later, she received an email inviting her to an interview.
She read it several times, hardly believing it was real. Then the nervousness came. She had never done an interview in English before. She spent the next 2 days practicing answers to common questions, writing them in her notebook and saying them out loud in front of the mirror. The interview took place on a sunny morning. The bookstore was small but beautiful, filled with the smell of paper and old wood. Louisa waited near the entrance, trying to stay calm. When the manager appeared, she greeted her with a smile. The manager spoke clearly but fast. Louisa listened carefully and answered slowly, focusing on being polite and positive. She talked about why she wanted to work there, what she liked about books, and how she hoped to practice her English through the job. There were moments when she couldn't find the right words, but she didn't panic. She smiled and continued. When the interview ended, she thanked the manager and walked out into the street, feeling both exhausted and proud. 2 days later, she received an email saying she got the position. Louisa couldn't stop smiling. It felt like another step forward, a small dream coming true. On her first day, she arrived early, wearing simple clothes and carrying a notebook in her bag. The manager showed her the shelves, explained how to organize books, and how to help customers. Everything sounded easy, but understanding English in a busy store was different from understanding it in class. People spoke faster, with different accents. Sometimes customers used slang or idioms she had never heard before. At first, she had to ask them to repeat. She made notes of new words and looked them up during her break. By the end of the week, she started to feel more confident. She learned how to greet customers, recommend books, and answer simple questions. Some people noticed her accent and asked where she was from. That made her feel seen and comfortable. She even started short conversations about travel, weather, or favorite authors. Each time, she used her English more naturally. After work, Louisa liked to sit in a small cafe nearby with a cup of tea and her notebook. She wrote down what she had learned that day, new words, expressions, or funny moments. She also wrote about her mistakes so she could fix them later. Every page of that notebook told the story of her progress. One evening, as she was closing the store, she noticed a little girl struggling to find a book. She helped her and listened carefully to what she wanted. The girl smiled and said, "Thank you." In that simple moment, Louisa felt something powerful. She had not only understood the words, but also connected with another person in a new language. It was exactly why she had come to London. That night, as she walked home, the city lights looked warmer. The air was cool, and the streets were full of life. She realized that her English journey was not only about learning words or grammar, it was about building courage, creating new experiences, and opening doors to new worlds. London no longer felt foreign. It was becoming her classroom, her challenge, and her reward.
The following weeks were busy and full of challenges. Louisa now worked several days a week at the bookstore and still attended her English classes. Her schedule was tight, and she often came home tired. Yet she continued to study every evening, reviewing new vocabulary and writing short paragraphs in her journal. The city that once felt exciting now sometimes felt heavy. There were days when she woke up and questioned if she was strong enough to keep going. But deep inside, she knew that giving up was not an option. One afternoon, the bookstore became unusually crowded. A new shipment of books had arrived, and many customers came in. Louisa worked at the front desk,
helping people find titles and answering questions. The noise of talking customers, ringing phones, and background music made it hard to focus. Then, an older man approached the counter and started speaking quickly. His accent was different, and Louisa struggled to understand him. She asked him to repeat, but he became impatient. Her heart started to race, and she felt the familiar fear of making a mistake. She tried to stay calm and focus on his gestures. After a few attempts, she finally understood what he wanted and helped him. He left without a smile, and Louisa stood there feeling small and exhausted. When her shift ended, she walked through the cold evening streets, thinking about the moment again and again. She wanted to cry, but stopped herself. Instead, she sat on a bench in a quiet park and watched people passing by. She remembered her first day in London and how scared she had been back then. Now, she was stronger, even if she didn't always feel it. She realized that confidence didn't mean never failing. It meant standing up again each time something went wrong. That night, she opened her journal and wrote about what had happened. She didn't hide her frustration, but she also wrote what she had learned. She promised herself to focus on progress, not perfection. Starting the next day, she created a new habit. Every morning, she picked one new phrase or expression and tried to use it during the day. It became a small, personal challenge. Some days, she succeeded easily. Other days, she forgot, but she kept trying. Slowly, she began to notice that conversations at work were becoming smoother. A few weeks later, one of her coworkers told her that her English had improved a lot. Louisa felt a quiet joy. She still made mistakes, but now they didn't control her. She spoke with more confidence and even started to enjoy small conversations with customers. She asked about their favorite books, gave recommendations, and listened carefully to their stories. The more she spoke, the less afraid she felt. At home, she practiced pronunciation by reading out loud. Sometimes she laughed at herself when she said something wrong, but it didn't bother her anymore. Her voice sounded stronger and more natural. She even noticed that she was thinking in English more often without realizing it. One rainy Sunday afternoon, she sat by her window, listening to the sound of raindrops on the glass. London felt quiet and peaceful. She realized how far she had come since her first days of confusion and fear. She still had a lot to learn, but she was no longer the shy girl who was afraid to speak. She had learned how to stay calm under pressure and how to believe in herself. That lesson was more valuable than any grammar rule.
Spring arrived quietly, bringing light and warmth to the city. The trees along the streets turned green again, and people spent more time outside. For Louisa, London no longer felt like a foreign place. It had become part of her routine, her memories, and her growth. Every morning, she walked to school with calm confidence. She no longer felt afraid to speak or make mistakes. The language that once seemed so difficult now flowed naturally from her lips. She had built a life made of small victories, and she finally began to enjoy every step of her journey. At school, Mr. Thomas announced that the course was coming to an end.
Each student would give a short presentation about their experience in London and what they had learned. Louisa felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Public speaking had always been her biggest fear, especially in English. But she also knew this was her moment to prove to herself how far she had come. That evening, she sat at her desk and began to write her story. She described her first day in the city, her job at the bookstore, and all the lessons she had learned about courage and patience. She practiced reading her text aloud until the words felt natural. When the day of the presentation arrived, the classroom was full of quiet energy. One by one, the students went to the front and shared their stories. Louisa listened carefully, proud of how much everyone had improved. Then it was her turn. She stood up, took a deep breath, and faced the class. Her hands shook slightly, but her voice was steady. As she spoke, she felt something new. Peace. She wasn't trying to be perfect anymore. She was simply sharing her truth. The room listened with attention, and when she finished, her classmates clapped warmly. In that moment, she realized that the fear that had once controlled her was gone. After class, she walked outside into the bright afternoon. The sun touched the old buildings, and the air smelled like spring flowers. Louisa stopped at a small cafe and ordered her favorite tea. She watched people passing by and thought about how much she had changed. She had arrived in London as a quiet girl afraid to speak. Now she could talk to strangers, help customers, and even give a presentation in another language. It was not just about English anymore. It was about confidence, growth, and believing in herself. That weekend, she met some friends from her language course in the park. They sat on the grass, laughing, sharing food, and talking about their future plans. Some of them wanted to stay in London, others planned to study in new countries. Louisa felt grateful for each of them. They had shared the same struggles, the same moments of doubt and hope. Together, they had learned not only a language, but also the meaning of persistence. As the sun began to set, Louisa walked home slowly. The city lights started to glow, and the sky turned pink and gold. She thought about everything that had happened, the confusion, the mistakes, the progress, the courage. She understood that learning English had changed more than her communication. It had changed the way she saw herself. She no longer felt small or unsure. Her voice had strength, and her heart had peace. When she reached her room, she opened her window and looked at the city that once scared her. The sounds of buses, music, and people's laughter filled the air. She smiled softly. The journey was not over. It was only beginning. She knew there would be new challenges ahead, but now she had something she didn't have before. She had her voice, the voice of confidence that came from every mistake, every lesson, and every brave moment she had lived.
And so, Louisa's story reminds us of something simple but powerful. Learning a language is never just about words or grammar. It is about finding your voice, step by step, even when it shakes. It is about courage, not perfection. Every mistake becomes a lesson. Every small effort becomes progress. If you are learning English too, remember this. You don't need to be fluent to start speaking. You become fluent because you start speaking. Keep learning, keep trying, and never stop believing that you can. Your English journey, just like Louisa's, is not a race.
It's a transformation. Speak today, grow tomorrow, and one day you'll look back and realize that you've already become the person you dreamed to be.
Thanks! Please subscribe and like. Spin a new yarn with us every week. See you there!